British politics is often discussed in binaries. Conservative versus Labour, left versus right, power versus opposition. But the reality of how influence works inside the Parliament, especially for minority politicians, is far more complex. Today's conversation explores these complexities through the career of a politician who has navigated British politics from the inside for over a decade, across party lines, ministerial roles, and moments of principled dissent. We're joined by Rehman Chishti, a Pakistani-born British politician who entered the House of Commons at just 31 and went on to serve as Conservative MP for Gillingham and Rainham from 2010 to 2024. Early in his career, he was described by outlets like the New Statesman and the Sunday Telegraph as one of the most promising MPs for his generation, even a potential Prime Minister in the future. Trained as a barrister, Mr. Chishti's political journey began in the Labour Party before he crossed the floor to the Conservatives, a move that continues to challenge common assumptions about ideology, opportunity and minority representation in British politics. He served as Vice Chairman of the Conservative Party, held roles across justice, education and community safety, and was appointed by the former Prime Minister Boris Johnson as the UK's Special Envoy on freedom of religion or belief. As a Kashmiri and a former minister responsible for religious freedom, Mr. Chishti was in Parliament during the revocation of Articles 370 and 35A, allowing us to discuss questions of advocacy, influence and narrative building. We also touch on the role of Pakistani diaspora in the UK, the rise of the far right, Islamophobia versus anti-Muslim hatred, and what meaningful political engagement looks like in an increasingly polarised environment. Welcome to Digital Debate. Rehman, it's a pleasure to see you. It's a pleasure to have you here. Thank you for your valuable time. You've been an extremely important member of the Conservative Party. You've also been an important MP for Muslims and minorities. You've had many important roles within the Conservative Party. But I want to start from the beginning. Why did you start with the Labour Party and then shift towards the Conservatives? Was it rooted in ideology, political pragmatism, or about meaningful change?
Well, Muzzammil, can I firstly say it's a pleasure to be on digital media, and thank you for your kind words. I think, with regards to politics and when you're growing up, it's, I came to the United Kingdom in 1984. I was 6 years of age and I did not speak a word of English. My father was an imam in Gillingham down in Kent, which had a very small Muslim community. And I was always, accepted and in the local community, and, you had all the freedoms in the world. And, but there was that concept in those days, and I think we still have it now in politics, that if you come from a modest working class background, you tended to vote Labour. And I think for me, when you're coming in at the age of 6 and your father's an imam, and I think as many of your viewers would know, an imam does not earn a lot of money in the United Kingdom or in other parts of the world.
Absolutely.
But you have the right values, the values of standing up for doing the right thing and family and moral ethics. And at that time, it was... My father always encouraged me to get into politics. He said, if you want to bring about change, he said, if you want to bring about change, you've got to be part of it. And I remember the Member of Parliament in those days was Jim Couchman, a Conservative Member of Parliament. And he came to our house and he sat on the floor with my father and he had a meal. And, he was absolutely wonderful in terms of the respect he showed. My father's the imam. But my father was always, it's from a modest background, Labour Party is the party for you. So I did. I joined the Labour Party and I was involved with the National Union of Students in Wales. And, that was another forum of bringing about change. And then I stood for office. And then when you were going through that journey yourself, and in 2005, I stood in the general election against Francis Maude, who at the time was the chairman of the Conservative Party, later a cabinet minister. And at the hustings, we ended up agreeing on many things. And I learned early on in life, never make politics personal. If you hear somebody speaking, common sense, and then you have to listen to what they say. And I think his philosophy of the Conservative Party, aspiration, opportunity, if you work hard, you can succeed. You have a style of government. You have a small state, big society, bottom up, rather than a Labour form of government where the state thinks it knows best for its citizens. And so after that election, I fought hard and I admired Francis, for the way he conducted and how he inspired, and he respected me for my campaigning. And I left Horsham in 2005 thinking, is the Labour Party for me?
So you don't agree with the
misconception or preconceptions that people have or continue to propagate that the Conservative Party is a party of the right-wing racists?
Absolutely not at all. I
You
think
didn't have any experience?
Not at all. Look, I think, and I would say that from my perspective, this is the party that gave this young lad from Gillingham, from Pakistan, from Kashmir, who came here with nothing at all. And you grew up in Gillingham, and people who know Gillingham, it's a working class constituency. A chance to be elected as a member of parliament at the age of 31, a chance to go on to serve as a minister in the Foreign Office, a chance to be the British envoy for religious freedom around the world. And therefore, don't get me wrong, there are issues out there. And
As
the
there
issues
are
that we
everywhere.
talk absolutely. And I think if you look in society, you have issues with regards to anti-Semitism and Islamophobia. And I was on the Home Affairs Select Committee and I challenged them. But as from a Conservative Party, my experience, I think I had an experience where the party was welcoming, it was inclusive, and I was the vice chairman of the party
Exactly.
for faith in communities. And you try to inspire people through your journey to say, get involved, work hard, and you can be a Home Secretary. Sajid Javid was the Home Secretary.
Not only the Home Secretary, but you were even touted at one point to become the leader of the country itself.
In 2022, I was one of the 11, and in that same race, there was Sajid Javid, another one from Pakistan, and you had people from different diverse backgrounds. Nadeem Zahawi was in that race as well. So I think the Conservative Party, for me, was a party which, from experience, different people may say different things, but I've gone through that path, and having won 4 elections, is a party where if you work hard, if you do the right thing, you can go on and be whatever you want to be, and you can run for the top job in the country. So it's a party of aspiration and opportunity.
We've now seen the Reform Party kicking up quite a storm, and also your party. When I mean your party, I'm not talking about the Conservatives, but I'm talking about your party with
Jeremy Corbyn and Zara
exactly.
Sultana.
And of course, there is the Independent Alliance as well.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts in terms of their efficiency and practicality of creating such entities in this new order that we're seeing in the United Kingdom and beyond?
Well, look, I think what I would certainly say, having seen the results of the last election, which I was involved in 2024, politics now is so uncertain. And I think if the two-party system is no longer a two-party system, I think you have the
Would you consider jumping from the Conservatives to another party?
Most certainly not. The Conservative Party is my party. We're working together as a team to rebuild, and I accept it's and take a lot, some time to rebuild. We lost over 250 members of Parliament. And in answering your question, in terms of how did we lose those 250 members of Parliament, in around 170 seats, it was the reform factor. Just like in my constituency, where I poll 11,500.
I guess it was just that maybe 100 or something votes that you.
No, in mine it was a couple of thousand.
Oh, really?
But what it was, so I get 11,500, Labour get 15, and Reform get from 0 to 8,700.
Wow.
So they split the vote. The Labour vote did not go up by much. It was the reform factor which came in at the last minute, where 56% of the people voted, which is low turnout. And then the Conservative vote got split on the centre-right. So that happened across the country.
Is it possible that your party would do the same thing to the Labour Party? Because they are basically a fraction.
If you asked me when they first came on the block and you thought, this is now interesting, with what Reform did the Conservatives, your party could. But if you've now seen what your party have done, your party have been caught up in infighting between themselves. They, if you've seen, with Zara Sultana and Jeremy Corbyn, both fighting between themselves, and you had some independents leave the Your Party. So from when it first came on the scene, if I'm being as frank as I can, I thought, this is interesting, because whatever you say about Jeremy Corbyn, his politics and mine are totally different. Mm-hmm. But the fact is, when he was leader of the Labour Party, their vote share, they didn't do as bad as people thought they would.
Absolutely.
They didn't.
Absolutely.
We won that election outright, but for him, they didn't do as bad as people thought. So people on the left know what they get with Jeremy Corbyn. And so having seen that infighting, I don't see your party being a major challenge, but I do think there will be another challenge. I think that left wing vote will go to the Green Party. I think you see the Green Party with where it's going in the opinion polls. So I think you will see the left coming together, And I think you've got Reform on the other side, you've got the Conservatives, you've got Labour. So if you ask me what do I think will happen in the next election, I don't think it's going to be a two-party system. I think you could potentially get a coalition with no one party getting 325 seats at all.
Let's look a little bit closer to your time in government. What kind of limitations did you face as an MP? When we talk about limitations, most of the time as ethnic minorities, we always talk about racism. I want to focus on the actual work itself. How does government work? Why were the limitations in various things that you wanted to do? We know, I mean, we're very well aware that you were on the front lines of trying to change the terminology that the government used from ISIS into Daesh.
Yeah.
And I think you even threatened to quit, or you actually did resign from the party because of it.
I said I would resign.
There was a threat.
So
clearly change can be made, but what kind of limitations are there when you're in government or as an MP or even on the
well, I think
opposite
the first thing
side?
you have to ask is, what is the duty of a member of parliament?
Exactly.
As a member of parliament, you're fighting for your constituents. You are a local member of parliament who fights for local resources for their constituency. You are also a member of a political party, so you work as a team to get things done in line with the manifesto that you've stood on. You're also a national legislator where you have to look at national issues of the day. And therefore, it's when you're trying to fight for resources for your constituency, say, for example, in my area, we need a hospital.
Yeah.
And so for me, one of the big issues for my district is you've got one of the busiest A&Es in Kent, the population increasing substantially, but healthcare resources are not being given at the rate they need to be given, and the premise is not adequate to deal with the growing need of the local area. So therefore you mark up what are your top priorities. You've got to work with the health secretary, you've got to work with neighbouring members of parliament, who also share the same hospital, and then you've got to carve out a strategy where you raise that with secretaries of state, ministers, and opportunities with the prime minister. I may have not got the hospital, but I secured 18 million extra funding for my constituency.
So your job is not just about things that are happening internationally, as most people seem to be voting on right now. Not that I'm taking anything away from people, but I guess what I'm trying to say and ask at the same time is that we often misunderstand the role of MPs, and we don't remember that they have to consider about the bins and the strikes that are happening there. We have to think about the hospitals and the schools. Everything is not about what's happening outside of the UK.
No, absolutely not. And I think if you then look at it, how many times does a foreign policy issue win you an election?
Absolutely.
The answer, it doesn't. It doesn't. The fact is, it's as a member of parliament, your first duty is to your constituency. What if you put it the other way around? Your first duty is your country. But at the same time, you also have to answer the question, which every member of parliament, 650, have to answer the question. They're elected by their constituents to serve them and their country, or their country and their constituency. And so therefore, you have to address the issue of schooling, make sure you get appropriate schools in your area, which we did. And then as a backbench member of parliament, what you can do, you can put forward private members' bills. Private members' bills, say, for example, in my area, there's a real issue with mental health. Mental health is perinatal mental health care. Mothers who need that care in Kent had to go to Margaret Oates in London. There was no mother and baby units in Kent. And that was completely and utterly unacceptable. And therefore, you then have to find a strategy of how do you get the government to change its policy. So for me at the time was constituents come to you to say we need help. You write to the appropriate commissioning bodies. Their hands are tied because they can have only a certain amount of resources. Yeah. So you need to have a facility. You then go to the Royal College of Psychiatrists and say, look, I need to change government policy. How do you change that? And they would say, the president said, look, I'd love to work with you. And it was, why don't you put forward a policy to say within every 70 miles, there should be a mother and baby unit.
Very good idea.
The government may not give it to you, but you will move the dial and they'll give you extra resources. So you then speak to other members of parliament to say, look, if I'm advocating for one for my area within 70 miles, same applies to you.
So then it becomes a cross-party policy.
And if you want to bring about change in parliament, you have to work cross-party. And that's what the first point I made is never make it personal. Cross-party, engaging, and they understand your issues. You then have to build a coalition. Once you do that, you take it to ministers, and we got a mother and baby unit in Kent. So we secured it. So as as a member of parliament, you look at it, you're thinking, issues come to you, and I would say this, and I say for all members of parliament, as a member of parliament, you can't do everything.
Of course.
You can fight for it, you can champion it, you can, prioritize certain areas that you want to get done, but as long as you've giving it absolutely everything. And when the time comes, like it will happen to every member of parliament, at some point, you may not win the election. But when the time comes, you look and you think, you know what? You
achieved
gave it
something.
absolutely everything and you made a difference.
Exactly.
You've done your job. But foreign policy does come in. And I'm happy to answer your point on that one.
So
the dash. ISIS point.
Talking about foreign policy, we can't avoid the discussion of Gaza and the Israel war.
Yeah.
Now, while you were in government, while you were in the House of Commons, you raised several issues in regards to, particularly after the humanitarian pause, and asking for the donation drive.
Yes.
The same way that was done for the Syrians.
Yes.
Why was that such a massive, massive problem for both sides of the aisle, that they couldn't agree on getting something done for Gaza during that pause, from a governmental level?
Yeah, I think what you had, it's when you saw the horrific acts that unfolded in October, and at the time you had, I was in the United States at the time. I was just finishing off lecturing in the United States at University of Oklahoma, and you were seeing how it was the issue was being looked at from different politicians around the world, and it was, look, at this point in time, it was Israel has a right to protect itself, and you're thinking, okay, I totally understand that, because any country around the world, if they've suffered a horrific terrorist loss, their first question would be right to defend yourself, and the country has a right to defend himself. And the question then was, it's okay, but also at the same time, that right to defend has to be proportionate. That right to defend also has to mean that there's innocent people here who are also now being caught in that crossfire. And therefore, when I came back to Parliament, and I said on the floor of the House, the first statement the Prime Minister Rishi Sunak made, and I said, look, with regards to what we're seeing, of course, it's a horrific, evil terrorist act. The question then is what is the United Kingdom going to do to work with the Palestinian Authority? How will it engage with the Palestinian Authority to bring about a ceasefire, to bring about humanitarian aid into the country? What engagement do we have? Because without dealing with the Palestinian Authority, you're not going to be able to bring about that change. And therefore, the question then was, and behind the scenes, this is what sometimes happens, is I then wrote to the Prime Minister's office with certain suggestions. And so you've raised it on the floor of the House, your point, and I think he said to me, excellent, the right point to make. And I think it was the weekend before that, if I remember correctly, he had a visit from the King of Jordan. King Abdullah. So before that, the Prime Minister was saying, absolutely, Israel has a right to defend itself, absolutely. But the question then is what is it doing to work with other Arab countries to bring about peace in the region, and also address the other issues of humanitarian situation on the ground? And so my view to the government then was, look, there wasn't that discussion on the ceasefire at that stage, because they were saying, well, look, both the parties, the Israelis and Hamas, are not wanting a ceasefire, which is correct. They weren't. The question then is how do you support the innocent people on the ground?
Of course.
How do you do it? And the question was humanitarian, and some were saying a ceasefire. I'm saying, well, if you can't get a ceasefire, there is something you can do. You can have a humanitarian pauses for 4 days, for 3 days, for 2 days, so that you can get aid in and you can get hostages out. So you're trying to find a way forward. And there were people then saying, well, look, that's not possible. I'm saying, well, look, but you have to start somewhere.
Nobody tried.
You have to start. You have to start somewhere. And then it was, because I was the chair of the all-party parliamentary group on Kuwait.
Oh, yeah.
The foreign minister of Kuwait was in London, Sheikh Salim. And I went and see him. And I said, look, your country has, a exceptional record where your late emir was regarded by everyone around the world for doing an exceptional job on humanitarian aid. Would you work with the United Kingdom to have a Friends of Palestine donors conference like the United Kingdom did with Friends of Syria? He said, yes. I said, okay, are you okay if I feed that into the Prime Minister's office? Yes. So, and that, people don't know about that. But there was things where you're working with, looking at creative ideas, you feed it into the system. And he also said, well, the United Kingdom can do something else. And I said, well, there is something they can do. He said, Bill Clinton had the Camp David.
Oh, yeah.
For a two-state solution.
Of course.
And if the United Kingdom wanted to play a leading role, they can have a Chequers summit for Palestine for a two-state solution. So there was ideas that you discuss and then you share, and then you're feeding them into the government constantly. So this is the stuff which members of parliament do that people don't hear about.
The public don't know.
They don't hear about.
Why did it not come to fruition then?
Well, I think it requires international leadership from the Prime Minister's office down, and
Do you mean to say political courage?
I would certainly say yes, political courage to do it, and it requires political leadership.
Yeah.
And I think it was having raised that with the Prime Minister. I think when he was a Chancellor, Rishi Sunak, he was a good Chancellor during COVID with regards to the furlough schemes and supporting people financially and economically. But political leadership in the foreign policy area, I wouldn't say was his main strength. And therefore, if it was me in that position, I would most definitely push for the United Kingdom to have to host a Chequer summit to bring all the parties together. I would also then, have a similar kind of summit to what we did with Syria Friends of Syria, the largest donors conference which David Cameron did. But it was good to then see when a new government came, that idea was then taken forward. And they've recently had a Palestine donors conference, which the Minister Hamish Faulkner had convened. But the question was, as a policymaker, you can come up with ideas, you can push them to the government, and you can work with international partners in that regard. So, yes.
Well, now that we're talking about policy influence and public pressure, we've seen in the UK a sustained campaign, especially on the ground and social media, people coming out onto the streets in regards to Palestine and Gaza, particularly from the younger Muslim communities, and even from. It's no longer just a Muslim issue anymore. It's transcended beyond that between the left and the right. We've seen it in America as well. Do protests still work? Can they genuinely change foreign policy, or at least in the power corridors? Are we able to create any influence by doing these things?
I would say you need a number of factors that come in. So, for example, if you look at the war, the United Kingdom's involvement in Iraq, there was over 1 million people on the streets of the country.
Yeah.
There were over 1 million people, but it didn't change the government's position at the time.
Absolutely.
It didn't.
Yeah.
But did it show that the United Kingdom public, there were a large section of society which had real concerns about that? Absolutely. Does that also then inspire politicians in the House of Commons to continue to advocate for a certain course of action? Absolutely. Protests, absolutely. If you live in a democracy, people have a right to protest. If it's done, in a peaceful manner, if it's done in line with the law, but absolutely, do I think the protest that took place that had an impact on changing government policy? Absolutely, because it showed that there were people in the United Kingdom from all different backgrounds, who were saying the United Kingdom needs to take leadership in this role. It needs to take because we have United Kingdom is a member of the Security Council.
Of course.
And what was embarrassing is when those motions for a ceasefire were coming up at the Security Council, it was United Kingdom, abstain, United Kingdom, abstain, United Kingdom, abstain. And I remember speaking on the floor of the House on the debate on the ceasefire in February when I said, look, when the Prime Minister stays, the United Kingdom, will lead the world at his Mansion House speech. And I said, absolutely, but that then means you've got to lead by taking decisive action.
Not abstaining
in that
from
regard.
every decision.
And that, absolutely. And therefore, I think and there were some politicians who were saying, were criticizing some in the demonstrations. Well, of course, you're going to get some individuals who link to those demonstrations, who hijack them for their agenda. But that shouldn't take away from the large number of people who want to, advocate in a peaceful manner for a certain cause of action. And that was on Palestine.
On a lighter note, are you suggesting that our Prime Minister currently, Mr. Starmer, is a more decisive leader than Rishi Sunak?
I'm saying...
because it was the Labour Party, or rather the Labour government, that recognises now the state of Palestine.
Well, I would say it's, rather than Keir Starmer, a real change and shift in Palestine has been down to the United States. And I think if you're looking at now the 20-point peace plan, if you're looking at Donald Trump, and I think if you're seeing if we're putting in the most simplistic terms, is the United Kingdom a global leader, as it was at one point? The answer is no. The United Kingdom is a great country which has a large convening power, which is a member of the Security Council, which is a member of Five Eyes, which is leaders on the Commonwealth, which is a G7, G20, absolutely. But we are not
Leaders.
the leader in regards to changing foreign
Decisive
policy.
leaders, I
Well,
think.
I say, yeah, fine. Yeah, I agree with that. Decisive leaders to be able to have that influence on countries like Israel. That pressure could have come from the United States. And I think in that regard, the steps taken by President Trump to push Prime Minister Netanyahu and bring about the other Arab countries together on the 20-point plan, I think was the right way forward. In answering your question, in compared to Rishi Sunak and what Keir Starmer has done, has Keir Starmer showed himself to have taken a greater lead on foreign affairs? Yes. You've seen that with Palestine. You've seen it with regards to also on Ukraine. He's been around the world pushing and advocating and bringing the European countries together. Look, politics, you challenge somebody and you criticize,
have to evolve,
where it's right to criticize, but also you've got to give credit. I think on bringing the European countries together, when the United States was saying it did not want to take that leadership role on Ukraine, which other European countries were expecting it to take, the Prime Minister did step up and he did bring other countries together. But also, I have to say, in 2022, Boris Johnson, when he was the Prime Minister, he led the world on supporting Ukraine militarily, economically, diplomatically. So different Prime Ministers, when they come in, have different strengths. And I think this Prime Minister...
And also different compulsions as well.
Yes.
The evolving times and the geopolitical games that are being played right now, you have to evolve. You cannot be static in your approach.
I agree.
But you mentioned Ukraine. Let's talk about Russia for a moment.
Yes.
And sanctions.
Yes.
Why don't sanctions seem to work? I mean, you come from a legal background. You are a barrister and a successful one at that. Explain to us how sanctions actually work, especially at that kind of level.
Yeah.
Why they haven't, or at least why we haven't seen an impact on Russia or any other country for that matter.
Well, I think let's first of all say, with regards to Russia and Ukraine, in 2022, Russia illegally invaded Ukraine. And at that point, it was absolutely important for countries around the world to say, look, we support international law. Countries which flagrantly disregard and attack another country, take its land, then need to be held accountable. The question then is what do you do?
Exactly.
And therefore, in countries like Ukraine, they will then say, we need other countries around the world to stand up and say that they will stand up for international law. They will support countries which have now their sovereignty has been violated. And then the question is how? So you can do it militarily, you can do it economically, you can do it diplomatically. United Kingdom did all three with regards to Ukraine. The question then is, if you want to then ensure that Russia is stopped in its illegal war with Ukraine, you've got to then address its means to carry out that war, and that is economically. And that's where sanctions come in, where you use sanctions to get countries to change their unacceptable behavior.
So like an economic punishment to...
Well, you have to. And I think we did it with Sudan to change their behavior in the past. The United Kingdom, the United States, working with other faith stakeholders at the time. And the question then is, you've got sanctions here for Ukraine and Russia. You've got separate sanctions for gross human rights violations. So here, the United Kingdom sanctions, and as a minister for sanctions, they had real impact. They did have real impact, and if you want to have real impact, you've got to do it in partnership with other countries. It's the United States, United Kingdom, European allies working together to, sector by sector, trying to cut off Putin's, financial means to continue to wage this war. The problem that we had, and the problem that we still have, is there are certain countries, which are supposed to be key allies of the United Kingdom, who did not support us on those sanctions. On one of those, and there's 44 non-aligned states, with regards to the Ukraine conflict. And one of the big ones is India. India the United Kingdom has a free trade agreement with India. United Kingdom says India is the largest democracy around the world. Allegedly, with regards to some of its flagrant disregards and behavior on human rights, but still, it is the largest democracy in the world. And we'll come on to in terms of its behaviors and actions in say, in Kashmir and other areas. But here, it was buying Russian oil. Russian crude oil. It was circumventing sanctions, and then by circumventing sanctions, it was not only buying that, it was also then selling it back into Europe. And I remember raising that when I had left office with Prime Minister Rishi Sunak to say, look, you've met Prime Minister Modi. Will they change their behaviour now? And the answer was, I didn't answer it. And so the question I would say is, look, the reason this war is going on, because Russia is continue able to leverage its economic means to continue that war. And we've seen innocent tens of thousands of people lost their lives. So, yes, sanctions can have a real impact to get countries to change their behavior. For individuals, you can have targeted sanctions against individuals to change their behavior and hold people to account for gross human rights violations. But there are certain countries, who Iran's another one, which buy Russian oil. So who then circumvent the sanctions that are being applied in that regard. So that's why we've got a challenge with the effectiveness of our sanctions system.
But I guess with Iran, it's slightly different because Iran is pretty much sanctioned by everybody. It's not just one sanction by one European country or North America for that matter. With Russia, it seems like India went out of their way to not just circumvent, because allow me to say this, Jaishankar, who was the external minister, he was in Washington, D.C., and when a reporter asked him why India continues to buy Russian crude oil, his exact words, I'm not going to say verbatim, but at least the way that I interpreted it, was that's a European problem, that's not our problem. And it felt like that maybe Rishi Sunak, and I say this with great respect, but I felt like maybe Rishi Sunak was compromised, again, for want of a better word, because the Indian government, particularly Modi, said that Rishi Sunak is our damad, he's our son-in-law, and he didn't correct them. I mean, he's the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland is being referred to, and within the Asian culture, we understand when you call somebody damad, what that actually means. And it just seemed like maybe behind the scenes that there was some kind of agreement, possibly. Not that you would know or have been complicit in it. But it seems that when it comes to sanctions or any violations, that some people are allowed to get away with it because it serves a particular purpose. At that time, is it possible that because of the free trade agreement that we see now, that was a reason?
Well, I think I would certainly say it's the reason it may not have been pushed to the level it could have been pushed, because India, under successive governments, is a key trading partner for the United Kingdom. And I think the free trade agreement the current government have signed with India, I think it's been reported as the United Kingdom's most significant free trade agreement post-Brexit. And therefore, the free trade, I think the bilateral trade is over 40 billion. And therefore, for the United Kingdom, it may not have pushed to the levels it should have pushed India with regards to, say, there's a number of issues here, whether it's regards to sanctions on and circumventing sanctions on Russia through buying its crude oil and then sending it into Europe as well. The question then also is India has a significant issue with regards to persecution of individuals from religious minorities. And when I was the special envoy for the British government for religious freedom, I had many members of parliament, and it's in Hansard. If you look at Hansard and debates on religious freedom, there is a document that's produced before those debates by the House of Commons Library. And in there, it's got written questions by different parliamentarians, and there was real concerns raised by parliamentarians about the treatment of Christians in India, and there was a real concerns raised by the parliamentarians on the treatment of Muslims in India. And also significantly during COVID, when some governments around the world were using COVID to further persecute religious minorities in their countries. And so the question then was, it's why are countries which are advocating for international law, they're advocating for human rights, they're advocating for to bring about peace in, say, Ukraine, not holding those countries like India to their
the same
commitments as others. And
Yeah,
I
exactly.
think, and that's why President Trump, when he then has, called them out, and he's then said, look, if you're not going to change your behavior, the tariffs that I'll impose on you to get you to change your course of action will be higher than would have otherwise been applied. So there is that real issue about consistency of application of rules with all countries around the world, and that's why I think it raises concerns. And for people when they say one set of rules applied to some countries, and then there's another set of rules applied to other countries, and therefore, if it's, say, for example, in Ukraine, we're absolutely rightly saying international law. We should
Yeah.
respect countries' sovereignty. Then at the same time, for example, in, say, India, Pakistan, and Kashmir,
Yeah.
we have a Security Council resolution of 1948, Resolution 47, which was drawn up by the United Kingdom as one of the signatories. And therefore, United Kingdom has not, under successive governments, pushed for that to be fully implemented for a self-determination for the people of Kashmir. So inconsistency in the application of international law and commitments from countries then cause a real grievance amongst individuals.
As a barrister, you may be more qualified to answer this question than anybody else, particularly than a politician. But when you talk about consistency of application of international law and rule and order, is there a mechanism that exists that can actually enforce the application of international law
By
and order?
countries?
Yeah.
I think you have the International Court of Justice.
Mm-hmm.
I think, but can the International Court of Justice get countries to change their decisions in terms of how they look at certain situations around the world? The answer is no. It comes down to each country, right? So international law is there, but then there is an interpretation on international law. Then you also have the International Criminal Court,
Yeah.
but some countries are not members of the International Criminal Court, and so I would say say for example, when there is a conflict, a war in Ukraine, there is a clear demarcation of somebody's sovereignty being violated, and you get countries, who are advocating for an international to come together to do everything they can to support that country that's been violated. For example, in Palestine, you've had Security Council Resolution 242 advocating for a two-state solution, on the 1967 borders, but that's been there since 1967. We're now talking about a ceasefire, absolutely rightly and properly, to bring back peace to the region, but we're nowhere near 242 or two-state solution. So we used to have the late King Abdullah, the Arab Peace Plan, 67 borders, but people talked about it, but there was no real vigor to deliver on it. But that was a Security Council resolution drafted by the United Kingdom, supported by other countries. So that brings me to the point to say, look, the inconsistency in the application of international law, that's what then leads to real alienation with citizens and people and countries around the world to say, well, you're asking us to support one course of action, but then there is another course of action which you're not consistently applying the same standards.
So there is a risk that if international law isn't adhered to, and the way that you mentioned that the expectations of who should be following international law could raise the risk of violence in potential conflict zones, further violence that escalate in the same way that we've seen what happened on October 7th, is because international law, you mentioned 67, King Abdullah, it's because things haven't moved on since then. No application of international law, no influence, no implementation of any rule by the Security Council has given eventual rise to parties to use violence as a method to make themselves heard.
I think the question is that gives certain elements to play into people's emotions, to say, well, look, you're being treated unfairly, you're being treated unjustly. Then it gets individuals being sucked into areas which nobody wants individuals to be sucked into, on the margins of society, and that then causes other greater national security risks that we've seen around the world. And so, say for example, it's we've seen when you get a vacuum created post-conflict, that vacuum can be filled by many actors. For example, in Iraq.
Yeah.
Iraq now, you have so many different proxies operating in Iraq, and therefore you have post the fall of Saddam Hussein, you've now got a massive security challenge for the region in that part of the world. And so I think it's what people want, and if countries around the world want people to respect and have certain standards, to say, well, look, international law, if it's with regards to proportionate use of force, if it's with regards to respecting each other's borders, if it's with regards to Security Council resolutions which have signed up and been voted on, have been put through, then on that basis there have to be adhered to and respected. I remember when I was a member of Parliament, I was sitting on the back benches, and I had a Foreign Office Minister stand up and say, United Kingdom, is committed to supporting Security Council resolutions. I'm sitting there thinking, okay, so does that mean you now will be advocating for all Security Council resolutions to be implemented? So there has to be a consistency in application. And I think in today's world, which there are so many different challenges and security challenges, there's people are alienated, and you're seeing politics in the United States where people want a different course of action because they don't want status quo. In the United Kingdom, they're moving away from a two-party system to other alternatives that we're seeing in opinion polls. So, and that, then same thing back in politics, people are so disillusioned with the whole system. They're disillusioned with it. Absolutely. And therefore, to gain confidence and trust in that, you have to have countries, you have to have individuals who will do what is right, and that is applying international law consistently.
During your tenure as the Special Envoy on Freedom of Religion and Belief, India revoked Article 370 and 35A, which was 2019. What actions were you part of when it came to not just condemning it, but restoring Article 370 and 35A, but also helping us understand what institutional diplomatic constraints were limiting for you as an MP, but also for the UK government at the time?
Well, look, let me put it in the background. As somebody, I was born in Muzaffarabad. I grew up with the Kashmir issue because my parents made sure that I was aware of my heritage. My parents made sure that I knew what the historical context was, and it's something which I remember in the 90s. It used to be Sabzada Ishaq Zafar, who was the former senior minister in the Azad Jammu and Kashmir government. He was here, and I used to arrange his meetings with British members of Parliament. And I was in my early 20s. I'd been an intern with Helen Clark, the MP. It was Helen Brinton then, the MP for Peterborough.
Okay.
And therefore, and he had an understanding of how Parliament worked, but you could do something, and my something was, and he used to say, it's, and he used to call me Ray. Rehman, Ray, can you organise my meetings? And said, yes, Uncle Hassan. So we used to take him to meet different members of Parliament so he could convey what to them, from his perspective as somebody who was a representative of that state, of the real challenges, whether it's on human rights, whether it's with regards to the issue of plebiscite, United Nations commitment, or whether it was he was the member of Parliament for Chakotay, which is on the line of control. When there was Indian shelling across the border, his constituency was right there. And then the impact on innocent loss of lives. So you grew up with, being aware of this, and there's always something everyone can do. Whether they can write a letter to their member of Parliament, that's something. If they can arrange a meeting with the members of Parliament, that's something. If they can attend peaceful protest, that's something. Or if they're fortunate to be members of Parliament, they can raise that voice even more. So I think before we get to 2019, I had in 2017, I had led a 8-member members of Parliament delegation to Pakistan, and that
to Azad Kashmir as well.
Yes, it did. Yes, so we did Islamabad, we did Punjab, we did Karachi. We met with the government officials across the board, and then we went to Muzaffarabad. We went to the Mahajir camp. People who've had to flee. They have nothing, and seeing hearing about their horrific journeys, seeing and you want to give people hope. And therefore, if you can take members of Parliament to meet them and they can hear about their challenges and ask them to say, look, we want you to do what you would advocate for any other citizen around the world, is to give us, security, prosperity, and an opportunity to determine our own destiny. And therefore, those members of Parliament that went with me, quite a few of them did not have Kashmiris in their constituency. One of them, Henry, came from Crawley, Henry Smith. He had a large Kashmiri community. But there was others who came with me on that delegation who didn't. But it was, it was an opportunity where you could take parliamentary colleagues for them to get a better understanding of what the issue is.
Did they get a better understanding?
Yeah, I did, because one of them then went on to be a member. So Royston Smith became a member of the Foreign Affairs Committee. So when the issue then came up on the Foreign Affairs Committee, he was equipped to say he went on the delegation, he went to Muzaffarabad, and then he met with officials in Islamabad and on foreign policy, security, had discussions there. And so you were able to do that. And then in 2018, we had the High Commissioner, Pakistan's High Commissioner in London was Nafis Zakaria.
He was, correct.
And he said to me, Rehman, we need to make sure that we get policymakers, members of parliament from all political parties together at a international conference so that, we can put on policymakers' mind and radar the latest situation that's going on, the horrific situation on human rights, the situation again on the commitment at the United Nations for self-determination, and I was chair of the parliamentary group on Pakistan, is would you be able to help convene that? And the foreign minister of Pakistan was there.
Yeah.
You had prime minister, you had policymakers from Australia, you had people from Malaysia, and you had Labour, Conservative, Lib Dem, you had parliamentarians from across the board there. And it was a wonderful opportunity where you could bring people together, you could highlight the issue, and that was timely because that was just before 2019
Exactly.
when Article 370 and 35A were brought in by the revoked by the Indian government.
Yeah.
And therefore, I think so. You were consistently, making colleagues aware of this issue, and also on the basis, look, you got two nuclear countries here. You got two nuclear countries, and God forbid, if something goes wrong,
Which inevitably it did on May the 5th.
on the May the 5th, and you saw it, and you've got a situation here where tens and thousands, and if if nuclear capabilities are tested here, what is going to happen to humanity over here? And I think on that issue here again, we saw this year, you had India saying, well, look, it's there was an accusation made about terrorism, but there's no evidence.
No.
There's no evidence at all. But what happened with that, innocent people's lives got lost. And I know because I've got family in Muzaffarabad, and I come there, and you've got the cross-border shelling that goes on. It's innocent people day in, day out that lose their lives. And I just think if we're going to advocate for around the world for people to be able to be masters of their own destiny and people to have their basic freedom and civil liberties, then I think the United Kingdom and partners around the world, and I'm glad to see that President Trump has said he's prepared to play a role to find a way forward in this, and I pay tribute to him because I think, if I'm being really frank, I think if we're going to see an initiative that could find a way, it's not going to be in London.
Yeah,
it's going to probably be in Washington.
It wouldn't matter where it came from as long as that initiative came.
Yeah.
Recently, you mentioned about the work that you've done so far, and I think that it's important to understand that a lot of the work happens behind the scenes. Everything isn't about showboating. Recently, there's been a debate in the Parliament in regards to Kashmir. We've had a lot of these debates on the floor. Nothing really seems to come out of these debates. We're unable to get the right responses from the government of the day. Is this a failure of advocacy, political literacy, or leadership? Or is it that the structural geopolitical realities that exist today simply are stacked against Kashmir, which is why we're not able to not only elicit a response, let alone actually make change in Kashmir?
Well, look, firstly, I want to pay a big tribute to all the parliamentarians who took part in the debate, who took part in previous debates, and when you had Article 370 and 35 abrogated, 2000 in September 2019, Dominic Raab was the Foreign Secretary, and numerous members of Parliament pushed him on that, and also with regards to the human rights situation. And so I pay tribute to parliamentarians from all political parties for standing up and on this important issue. The question then is the answer that you consistently get from the government, and I think you saw it in the debate with Imran. And I know Imran well, and I know he's passionate about this, and I think he's chairing the APPG with other parliamentarians, getting them together, because APPGs are only as effective as you make them. And I think by securing debates means you make the minister aware of the significance of this issue has with regards to policymakers and their constituencies. And I think he did that. But the question is, if you look at the response from the Minister Hamish Faulkner, That's the same answer that you've had from successive ministers for
decades,
South Asia to say this is a bilateral issue between India and Pakistan. And I think what we have seen this time from Hamish Faulkner is to say, taking into account the wishes of the people of Kashmir. But he didn't say the UK will take a lead at the United Nations. So I think the question is this effective? Can more be done? Well, let me put it the other way. The other way is this. So when I was the United Kingdom Prime Minister Special Envoy in 2019 for freedom of religion or belief, the government had commissioned a report on religious freedom by the Bishop of Truro, called the Truro Report on Religious Freedom or Belief, Persecution of Christians and Religious Freedom for All. And Jeremy Hunt was the Foreign Secretary. And the question was, why did you commission it?
Mm-hmm.
And he said, well, because after the Palestine issue, religious freedom is the second largest issue that's been raised with the Foreign Office by parliamentarians. So it was absolutely right and proper that we should commission a independent report into this. So my question on that is, if that report, which is absolutely crucial to getting the government to advocate how they're going to take forward the global lead and agenda on religious freedom, and I was fortunate to lead as the envoy where we work with the US and as set up an alliance for 26 countries. That came out of representations made by members of parliament, by letters that went into the Foreign Office to show the significant feeling of the issue. So these debates that we have, absolutely crucial, because it says to the government, there is a significant number of members of parliament, and I think there's about 40 members of parliament who represent constituencies with large British Kashmiri communities.
Absolutely.
My constituency wasn't. There wasn't many British Pakistanis or Kashmiris in that, but it's because I believed in the issue. I was born in Kashmir, and I'm somebody who stands up for an international rules-based system, and as a lawyer, and you had advocated it as a British envoy for religious freedom for all, and as a Foreign Office Minister, foreign policy is a key area of interest for me. Mm-hmm. But it was, even in this debate, it was important to see parliamentarians coming together, pushing the government to say, you need to do more, and will you take the leadership at the United Nations? And my question is, in answering your question, is how can you then put forward the right question to the minister? And the right question to the minister will be this. And I remember raising it with David Cameron when he was the Foreign Secretary. So David Cameron, used to meet members of Parliament, and I said, Prime Minister, you're asking colleagues to support the United Kingdom around the world on Ukraine for an international rules-based system and international law. Correct. I said also at the same time, this was looking at Palestine. I said, well, at the same time, people are asking the question, we've also drafted the Security Council Resolution 242 on two-state solution. Why are we not taking that lead at the Security Council, sir? Because people are then saying we're advocating for one international rules application, and on the other one, we're not. And his answer to me was, look, I totally understand your point. Slightly different context, but I understand your point. But my point to him was, look, if you're then saying we should support Ukraine, there's other areas around the world on that. So I think on this issue here, the question again should be, to the Minister at the Foreign Office, look, you're advocating that the United Kingdom is standing for an international law. The Keir Starmer, when he first went to the United Nations, and it has stated that the United Kingdom would lead the world on international rules-based system, and in that regard, and his statement of his Attorney General was Mr. Herman was also saying the United Kingdom will play a greater role with the application of international law. Is why then are you not applying Security Council resolutions? And I know Kashmir is 47. The question is, you got to link this to a specific decision the government is taking. Ukraine is important. It's a key part of British foreign policy. International law. International law also then means the United Kingdom is a member of the Security Council. It drafted Security Council resolutions. Why are you not then, Minister, making this a priority for the United Kingdom at the United Nations for the forthcoming year ahead or the year after that? So you have to consistently remind them to say, look, you're saying we'll do this in this part of the world, then why are you then not applying the same consistency in this part of the world?
So there is a strategy to how these debates can be conducted and what kind of questions should be asked. I think one of the takeaways that I've seen in my time observing these debates is the answer is always, as you mentioned rightfully, that this is a bilateral issue between India and Pakistan. despite knowing that it's not,
Yeah.
based on Security Council resolutions, based on the fact that Kashmiris have a distinct identity and are a people in themselves. Does a lot more work need to be done before these debates actually happen, so we can actually educate the government of the day of what the situation is, as opposed to coming up with the same rhetoric that they've had, despite which government it's been and which party have been in power for the last 30, 40, 50 years?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a number of things that can be done. One is with regards to you have Hansard. You have written questions in Hansard. So members of parliament can write to ministers on any issue they want, and the minister has to respond. And that question could be on human rights. And say, for example, in the human rights situation, how many citizens do you have from Kashmir who are currently held in custody, in detention in Indian administered Kashmir? And the question is, there'll be a significant number. So parliamentarians a different week can raise a different case, consistently get it on the radar. You have Foreign Office questions every 6 weeks. You can have members of parliament can put a question in specifically. They're chosen by ballot. It's a different matter, but you have a strategy. Human rights, it's got to be twofold. Strategy, human rights, absolutely, because the United Kingdom says it will play a leading role around the world on advocating for human rights, absolutely. So therefore you have to go through list by list, area by area, where there is gross human rights violations in the Indian occupied Kashmir. And with that, and that can be done if you have, say, for example, 50 members of your all-party parliamentary group on Kashmir. Each member of parliament can raise a specific issue a different week. But then you also have to have the other argument is, what is it that we're trying to achieve? Is it that you're trying to achieve is that apart from highlighting the issue of gross human rights violations, what is it you're trying to achieve? Is it a Security Council resolution implementation for the people of Kashmir to have self-determination? Is it that? Or is it that you're trying to want to raise both issues at the same time? And therefore you have to have a clear strategy in that. And my question also then will be, then if that is what you want to do, then you have, you want to then look at which countries around the world are going to be key levers on being able to move that dial.
Of course.
The United States is going to be one of them. United Kingdom is going to be another. France is a member of the P5. Germany plays a key role in Europe, so you need to convince. So you need to have a list of those key countries that you want to be able to engage with in that regard. Just to touch on your previous point, which you said, look, changing international government's policy on the foreign policy issue. I remember in 2015 and 2014, when the government was dealing with the issue in Syria, and you had day in, day out, you had media and you had government ministers taking action against Islamic State or ISIL. And at that time, you're sitting in parliament, as a backbench member of parliament, thinking, Islamic State? There isn't a Islamic State.
Exactly.
There isn't a state, and the actions of the terrorist organization that we saw in Syria and Iraq is not Islamic. And therefore, what was happening is, by using that terminology, you're having there were 600 British citizens who went to Syria and Iraq and who were radicalized. They were radicalized in the United Kingdom, and they went over there and they were sucked in by a poison ideology. And if you're in the United Kingdom as a British Muslim, you're going by your own daily lives, and then you're having stigmatization, and you had a real rise in anti-Muslim hatred or Islamophobia, whichever terminology you want to use. And I remember saying to David Cameron in 2015, I said, look, we need to address this, because this issue is a national security threat. It is a real threat to community cohesion, and we need to change our terminology. Military action alone is not going to defeat Daesh. And the answer was, look, I get your point in terminology, but it's the same thing. I said, Prime Minister, if you spell it D-A-I-S-H, it becomes Dawat al-Islamiyya. But if you spell it D-A-E-S-H, it's a pejorative.
Exactly.
And he had also, before the 2015 election, said to me, would you engage in, support me in certain target seats with Muslim communities? Go and engage and listen and bring back and get them, to be more aware of what the government policy is. And we've got to win those seats to form a government, which we did win the election. And then I said, look, Prime Minister, you asked me to do that. And I came back to you and I said, they've raised the point.
Exactly.
They said, look, they don't want their religion linked to a terrorist organization. And it's, they appreciate other stuff that you're doing in government on jobs and security and prosperity. But this is against security, and also it feeds into Islamophobia and anti-Muslim hatred. And he said to me, can't change it. But then it was I then wrote an article in the Arabic newspaper Al-Ashraq Al-Aswat, and then I sent that to 650 members of parliament. I then shared it with the chair of the Intelligence Committee, Julian Lewis, on why counter-narrative was important. He supported it. I shared the article with Boris Johnson, who was the Mayor of London. He supported it. Keith Vaz was chair of Home Affairs Committee, counter-radicalisation, security. He agreed with it. So we had 170. I managed to get 175 members of parliament to support that issue, and I consistently raised the issue with the Prime Minister when he came back from the G7. There was always a section on security, and I had always used to say, Prime Minister, now dealing with the issue of counter-narrative, with so many members of Parliament of this House, now asking you to address counter-narrative and to address dealing with this poison ideology, 1, 2, and 3. Got to the vote on Syria, and in late 2015, and the government said to me, are you going to vote with the government on Syria? I said, well, how can I vote on this motion on Syria when it says take action against ISIS? I've just asked 150 members of parliament to 175 then at that late stage to support this, and they have. If I now vote for it, it shows I was wrong.
Exactly.
And then I will resign as the parliamentary private secretary from the Attorney General's parliamentary private secretary. David Cameron was a great leader because he listened. He then, when he got the feedback that he's prepared to step aside, he knew I was genuine in what I was trying to do. And I was only following up on raising concerns which I had previously raised with him, but now I've got a parliamentary caucus which is supporting me because it's the right thing to do. He brought me in for a one-to-one meeting. He heard what I had to say, and he then said, look, you are right. Write the paragraph on changing narrative. As of tomorrow, the government's narrative will now change from using ISIS to Daesh. And so therefore, when you're working with parliamentarians across the board, when you've got a strategy, and as part of that strategy, I think in those days we had, somebody who was also speaking on this around the world was Prince Turki Faisal.
Oh, yeah.
So I'd invited him to give a lecture in Parliament, invited parliamentarians to listen to what he was saying. He was going for a stronger terminology, fahish, which is obscene, and I was saying, look, Daesh is what NATO partners, France is using, let's go with that. So it shows that when you have a strategy, you can work with parliamentarians to bring about effective change. And I think on foreign policy issues, I think what you have to do is you've got to consistently keep advocating for your points, and you've got to build coalitions, and you've got to keep it on the radar. Because at some point, and I think on the issue of Kashmir, if we're going back to where we started, if the next election is going to be a coalition government, and where 10 votes either here or there could decide who forms a government. Because at the moment, if you ask me, look, of course I would say I want a conservative government, but I'm also saying to you, the reality is it could go anywhere. Absolutely. And if it's going to go anywhere, then those issues
make it work.
Yeah, those members of parliament say, look, these issues, we've got to find a way forward. And I think that's when you can push to find a way forward. Or you get a situation where you get a leader around the world who specifically wants to bring about a change. And I think at the moment, President Trump has said, look, he wants to bring peace around the world. And therefore, with what he's done in the Middle East, he's looking to do elsewhere. Then I think it's a perfect opportunity for, if people on Kashmir issue say, look, UK, but also significantly focus on the United States Senate, Congress, and to get them to continue to push the United States to take a greater lead on this issue, I think maybe what will be the way forward.
You mentioned anti-Muslim hatred
Yes.
and Islamophobia, and you
Yeah.
interchanged them. Is there a reason for that?
Well, look, I was the member of parliament who, on the floor of the House, said to Rishi Sunak, it's the government's strategy on dealing with hatred and intolerance against all faith communities is not consistent. So what you had, and what I was trying to say is, as somebody who had served on the Home Affairs Select Committee, I saw data, and I was the one who was speaking significantly on dealing with counter-radicalisation and extremism. And the data that we had from the Home Office, there's two faith communities which get the largest amount of hate, and that is the Muslim community and that's the Jewish community. And with regards to the Jewish community, there was a independent advisor on anti-Semitism, rightly so. And therefore, with regards to Islamophobia, because Theresa May's government called it Islamophobia, and then Rishi Sunak's government was saying it's anti-Muslim hatred, and it was Gary Asam was appointed. But Gary Asam did not have his terms of reference given to him in full, and his role was left vacant for about 2 years.
Wow.
And therefore, in the budget that we saw with Jeremy Hunt, who is an exceptionally decent and good guy, but there was a blind spot in that budget because the government allocated funding for anti-Semitism, but they didn't allocate any funding for anti-Muslim hatred or Islamophobia. I'm just trying to cover both because they say it was for one or the other. So I just said, look, Prime Minister, the fact is, there is a real issue over here. And I'm somebody as the former British envoy for religious freedom who treats all faiths equally. Christianity, Judaism, Islam, Sikhism, Bahaism. And I was the envoy who helped work with the US. We had Baha'is who were being held captive in Yemen. Mm-hmm. We got them released. Mm-hmm. It was the teams working behind the scenes and doing it. So we treated all faith communities fairly and equally. So when you see an injustice over here, one getting funding and resources and the other not, and I said that to him on the floor of the House with 600 members of Parliament, to say, look, having tried to engage with him privately, whatever you call it, Prime Minister, the fact is there is an issue here with intolerance and hatred towards one faith community. And the government hadn't put adequate resources in there. And I was on the record on that because in life, you've got to be fair, you've got to be inclusive, and people that see you in government, whether you're a minister or an envoy, as a policymaker, you work with parliamentarians across the board, and you have credibility. So when you see something wrong, you've got to say it. With regards to the debate on your point on terminology, there were some parliamentarians who had said they should, from the APPG on British Muslims, said it should be Islamophobia, and there was a specific definition they wanted. There's others, they said, we cannot go down with this definition. And I'll be completely frank with you. When I was the British envoy for religious freedom, the point 3 on that report was using a definition on Christophobia for Christian persecution. And I then said, look, I'm not in an adequate position to make the decision. Why don't I ask Archbishop Angelos to then look at all the evidence and then come up with whether we go with the definition or we say we should look at anti-Christian hatred across the board rather than a specific definition. And he said it is with regards to anti-Christian hatred in the wider context. I said, okay. So I did not want to be drawn in to a specific. What I wanted the government to say, looking at the evidence, looking at the data, is there a significant rise of hatred towards the British Muslim community? And the answer was yes. Because the Home Office Select Committee had found it was. And if that is the case, along with the hate and intolerance against the Jewish community, there should be the same amount of resources towards dealing with the intolerance and the hatred in that, which at the time in government there wasn't. So for me, you have to have, again, consistent application of dealing with intolerance and hatred towards all if you're going to bring about a cohesive, inclusive society.
Coming towards a close now, and I've taken a lot of your time.
That's all right.
There's been a lot of people in the diaspora. It doesn't matter whether they've been from a Pakistani background or from various different types of Arab backgrounds that have been involved in, be it protesting for Gaza, trying to change the narrative in terms of Islamophobia versus anti-Muslim hatred because of the legal terminology as well. There are a new generation of young people, Muslims as well as non-Muslims, from ethnic backgrounds. What kind of message would you give to them, particularly those that consider that the system is rigged and therefore we shouldn't necessarily have to engage in the political structures that exist?
Well, I would say to them, look, if you want to bring about change, you have to get involved in the system. Whichever political party you want to join, get involved, because if you are in the system, whether you're a councillor, whether you're a county councillor, whether you're a parish councillor, you have the authority to bring about some change. You can then liaise with your members of parliament, of course, use public protests in a peaceful manner to make people aware of your views. But at the same time, you need to be part of that system and say, if you are members of parliament, you're then on the floor of the House. Then when these issues come to the floor of the House, you are then raising them directly with the Prime Minister. And then you can, stand to be the Prime Minister where you can make those decisive big decisions, or you can be ministers. And in this country, we've had members of parliament from all political parties, and and we've also had people in government at senior level from all political parties, and people from different faiths, and people from the Muslim faith, and Sadiq Khan, people may disagree with his politics, but from an aspirational perspective, from what where he came from a modest background to being a lawyer, to being a member of parliament, to being a mayor of London, it shows what Great Britain is about. If you work hard, if you do the right thing, this is a land of opportunity. And I think I would definitely say to people in society, to be able to advocate your case effectively, you want to make sure that your youngsters get the best education possible. If you get the best education possible, then they would know how to advocate their case. And therefore, if they are able to advocate their case convincingly and passionately, then in today's world on the media, you have narratives. They can put a different narrative when somebody else is putting a certain narrative by quoting chapter rules, previous decisions by government. So make sure your youngsters get the best education. Make sure your youngsters, I would say to the younger generation out there, get involved in all sections of society, and then get involved in the democratic process. And I think if you do that, then you would have more members of parliament who are coming from different diverse backgrounds. We have about 90 at the moment from the diverse communities, and I think that's significant. So I think with the United Kingdom, and I truly do say this, is a land of opportunity. For when I was running in that leadership race in 2022, there was half of those in that race were people from different with their ethnic origins from different parts of the world.
And you wouldn't be able to imagine that in France, for example. We've seen the rise of the far right in France and Germany and some other, I think some of the Slovakia or some other places. The Netherlands, for example. The UK is significantly different. There is more accommodation, no matter how many people consider the system to be rigged. As you mentioned, if you're not part of that system to change it, you can't really cry about it.
No, and I would say, look, and somebody for me, it's my father was an imam, my grandfather was an imam, my uncles were imams. So when you then debate in parliament, say for example, issues coming up on the on halal, halal meat, and there are some members of parliament who say, we should not have halal slaughter in the United Kingdom because it's contravenes the animal welfare. But if you have members of parliament who are informed of why people from the Muslim faith and the Jewish faith, have to have their food requirements comply with a certain religious requirements, and how it also then addresses their concerns on animal welfare. That's because you are informed, the issues, you are engaged, and therefore to be able to convincingly do that. Of course, I'm saying, look, not everyone should be a member of parliament. I think if you want to be it, you have a great opportunity to do it. There's other professions, and I would say go out there, be doctors and nurses and be lawyers and be in the armed forces. The armed forces do a great job. But get involved in that democratic process.
Don't isolate yourself.
Yeah.
In closing, as the last question for you, when you shifted from the Labour Party to the Conservative Party, did nobody say to you, Rehman, you're a traitor?
I think there'll be some people who would say that they were not very happy with
But I mean
decision.
traitor. I mean from within our own minority community that seem to think that the Labour Party is the only party for the minorities.
I think that I didn't have that. I think that I didn't. And I think the reason I probably didn't have that is there's people who were not happy with my decision. There were colleagues who were colleagues and worked together. But I think you got to do what you think is right. And I think on these issues, I have immense respect for my parents, but I think when it's just voting a certain way because your parents vote a certain way, I would always say, ask the question, why? Why are we doing it? Or does it tie into your own personal beliefs? And, you got to justify it to yourself. It's the decisions that you make, because we're all held accountable.
Absolutely.
Individual responsibility in that regard. But no, I think it was a time where when you're leaving all your friends behind because you were, politically. You're starting a new chapter. You don't know where this journey will take you. But yeah, there was people who were not happy. But at the same time, if you believe in it, you got to go with where your conscience goes on these matters. And irrespective of what people say, you live in a free world, right? You got to just accept and respect. And I'd always say one thing is never make politics personal.
Absolutely.
Always be courteous. Always be polite. You can disagree. You can firmly disagree. But always be courteous and civil to one another.
Thank you very much for your
Pleasure.
time. You've been a gentleman
great.
and a scholar to us, and hopefully we learn a lot from this.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.